"You're really gonna play that?" The elitist music director sneered, eyeing the battered piano with open contempt. But what followed wasn't just music, it was a revolution. When a humble teenage girl is humiliated on stage for bringing her broken upright piano to a prestigious concert, she chooses to play anyway. What unfolds next stuns the entire audience, sparks a student revolt, dismantles a toxic institution, and transforms a quiet underdog into a national symbol of truth and artistry. This is the unforgettable story of Lena Moreau, a girl who played through pain, defied expectations, and reminded the world that real beauty isn't found in perfection. It's found in courage. And one cracked key at a time, she played her way into history. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. You're really gonna play that? The voice, smooth and scornful, cut through the concert hall like a bitter wind off a Carolina pier in winter. The man in the velvet suit turned slowly, one brow arched as he examined the worn piano being rolled in on squeaky wheels. His gaze settled on Lena like a final judgment. She didn't answer. Her fingers clutched the edge of the piano bench, knuckles pale as chalk. The sound of murmuring from the audience beyond the velvet curtain grew louder. Whispers, suppressed laughter, all of it aimed at her. Mr. Hawthorne, guest conductor and director of the National Youth Conservatory, took a theatrical step forward. He tapped the side of her piano with the tip of his silver baton, then gave a mock wince, as if touching something diseased. "That thing belongs in a barn, sweetheart," he muttered with a smile meant for cruelty, not charm. Not in front of 1,000 donors expecting Rachmaninoff on ivory. The tech crew froze. A young stagehand, no older than Lena, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Lena blinked once, slowly, then turned her head and stared directly at Hawthorne. Her voice, when it came, was calm. "I'll still play." The words hung between them like smoke from a fire about to roar. Mr. Hawthorne's grin faltered. "Suit yourself," he said, walking away, his patent leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. "Just don't say I didn't warn you. One cracked key, and this entire hall's going to laugh you off stage." She waited until his footsteps faded behind the wings before she allowed herself to breathe. Her fingers brushed the wooden top of the upright piano. It bore scratches like scars, each one a story. She ran her palm across the lid, remembering how long it took to sand that part smooth. The chipped key that still caught a little when you pressed it too hard. The middle pedal her father had reinforced with a washer and duct tape after it nearly broke off during practice. It was the only piano she'd ever played. And it was enough. The orchestra continued tuning beyond the stage curtain. French horns droned, violins shrieked softly. The oboe gave its lonely middle A. But Lena barely heard any of it. She was back in her garage at home, sitting on a crate beneath a dangling light bulb, hands raw from fixing bikes with her dad all day, sweat clinging to her temples, a pencil tucked behind her ear. And yet, when she sat at this very piano, it felt like the world paused, like her mother was near. She had died when Lena was 8. A car accident, too fast, too final. Her mother had been a music teacher, soft-voiced, laugh like chimes, always humming when she cooked. After the funeral, Lena had found this piano broken in a neighbor's shed. They gave it to her for free. She had dragged it back with a wagon and a prayer. It took her father 3 months to get the soundboard stable again. Another month to scavenge parts from junkyards. But when Lena played those first few notes, tentative, trembling, her father stood in the garage doorway with wet eyes and whispered, "She's still here, baby. She's in the music." Now, years later, that music was all Lena had. And tonight, she was going to give it everything. A bell chimed. The auditorium lights dimmed. The show had begun. Backstage, Lena stood to one side as 2 performers from the East Coast Conservatory glided past her in matching silk gowns. One girl, tall and porcelain-skinned, glanced at Lena's piano and smirked. "I thought we were performing in a concert, not an antique auction." The other girl giggled as they disappeared behind the red curtains. Moments later, applause rang out like rolling thunder. The lights shifted. The show began in earnest. Lena stepped away into the shadows and leaned against the cool wall. She hadn't eaten since morning. Her palms were damp, her breathing shallow. The faint smell of rosin and cologne filled the backstage area. Then came the voice again, Mr. Hawthorne's voice, booming from the other side of the curtain like he owned the air itself. Next, we welcome a very special performer, a wild card, if you will. Proof that this program is open-minded, sometimes too open-minded perhaps. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. Miss Lena Moreau, playing on her personal instrument, he added, letting the word hang like a curse. Silence. Then a spotlight shifted, and a door creaked open. It was time. Lena stepped onto the stage. Her legs were unsteady, like she'd just climbed a mountain. The air felt denser out here, hotter. The lights stung her eyes. She pushed the old upright toward center stage. The wheels squeaked again. More laughter. Someone whispered, "Is this a joke?" From the back row, a man's voice called, "Where's the real piano?" Lena said nothing. She sat. The hall was too big, the air too thick. But the moment her fingers hovered above the keys, she felt it again. That pause, that hush in her soul. She could hear her mother whispering in memory, "Don't rush, don't hide, just let them hear you." She closed her eyes and waited. A full 10 seconds passed. No one breathed. Then, with the gentlest of touches, she pressed the first note. It was not a piece anyone knew. Not Chopin, not Debussy, not Liszt. It was hers. The opening measure was soft, simple chords, left hand like a heartbeat, right hand a whisper of melody. The creaky piano protested, but only slightly, as if clearing its throat. Lena let the sound swell, filling each pause with purpose, letting every note bleed into the next like a confession. She thought of her father, covered in grease, humming along in the garage. She thought of the quiet nights alone, when music was her only warmth. She thought of her mother, smiling, proud, watching. The stage disappeared. The hall, the crowd, Mr. Hawthorne, gone. It was just her. Her and the sound. And then, just as her melody climbed into its highest crescendo, a sharp crack echoed through the concert hall. One of the back legs of the piano buckled slightly. Lena's body lurched forward, almost hitting the keys. The audience gasped. Laughter erupted again. But she didn't stop. She didn't even flinch. She adjusted her posture mid-note, hands flowing into a lower octave, improvising seamlessly. The music changed. It deepened, darkened. The melody slowed, rich with pain. What had begun as beauty was now grief. What had begun as hesitation was now resolve. And for the first time since she entered that theater, the audience grew still. There were no more whispers, no more mockery. Just sound, raw, imperfect, utterly human. When she struck the final chord, it hung in the air like a bell in an empty chapel. Silence followed, a long, uncertain silence. Then someone, an older woman near the front, stood, placing a hand to her chest. She clapped, then twice. Then all at once the theater thundered with applause. Lena looked up. Her hands trembled. Her chest rose and fell like she'd just run 10 miles. The lights blurred into golden halos. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just looked down at her mother's piano, cracked, scarred, defiant, and rested her fingers across its keys. She had played. She had been heard. The applause rolled across the concert hall like waves in a storm, uneven, chaotic, then cresting into a thunderous, unified roar. Lena didn't move. She couldn't. Her hands were still resting on the keys. Her fingers curled slightly as if holding on to the final echoes of the music. Her shoulders rose and fell, a slow rhythm against the backdrop of wild clapping and scattered cheers. In that fragile, golden moment, she wasn't a teenager from the East Side with a rusted piano and calloused fingers. She wasn't the wild card. She wasn't the joke. She was a musician, a storyteller, a survivor, and somewhere in that sound, her mother had heard her. But not everyone was clapping. From the edge of the stage, Mr. Hawthorne stood frozen, his face stiff with something too tight to be called a smile and too brittle to be grace. He turned to the production team, gave a sharp hand signal, and the lights dimmed abruptly, cutting short the audience's ovation. The curtain quivered. Lena finally stood, moving like someone slowly waking from a dream. She gave a small, instinctive bow. Another wave of claps surged forward, despite the lights, and she could see now, people rising to their feet, not out of politeness, but out of something purer, something real. A few rows back, a teenage boy in a tuxedo whistled and shouted, "Encore!" Another voice joined in. "Let her play one more." Lena backed away from the piano, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She turned toward the wings, toward escape, but stopped cold when she saw Mr. Hawthorne standing there, waiting for her. His expression was composed now, polished, even. The mask of civility was back in place. "You certainly know how to milk a moment," he said smoothly, stepping into her path. She felt the sting in his words, hidden behind the silk of his voice. "I didn't ask them to clap," she whispered, her voice shaking more from restraint than fear. "But they did," he replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And now they expect something dramatic, emotional, more of that raw authenticity they all claim to crave." He glanced out toward the still cheering crowd. "That's the problem with feeding the mob. They'll want blood next." Lena clenched her jaw. He leaned in, his voice lowering like a hiss. "Let me be clear, Miss Moreau. This concert is about excellence, not sentiment. And no matter how moving your little display was, this stage does not belong to you." Lena stepped around him without a word. She made it halfway down the corridor before her knees gave out. The adrenaline, the terror, the weight of all those eyes, it hit her like a crash. She leaned against the cold concrete wall, trying to steady her breath. Her palms were damp, her ears still ringing. Then she heard footsteps. "Hey," she turned. A girl stood there in full performance gown, Emily Daniels, the top-ranked pianist in the conservatory's senior division. Lena had seen her photo in the brochure, a prodigy, a darling of the critics. Her presence here was like seeing a constellation walk into view. Emily's eyes weren't mocking, they weren't guarded, they were wide, soft, surprised. She trailed off. "Honestly, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard." Lena blinked. "Thank you," she murmured, feeling the words like a whisper she hadn't dared hope for. "No, I mean it," Emily said, stepping closer. "You didn't just play, you told a story. I've played on Steinways my whole life and never made people cry like that." Lena didn't know how to respond. For a moment they just stood there, two girls from opposite ends of the world, bound by an invisible thread of melody. Then Emily added quietly, "He hates being upstaged." Lena didn't have to ask who she meant. Back in the auditorium, the audience had quieted only because the next performer had begun. But the room didn't quite settle. There was a buzz under the surface, a restlessness. Something had shifted. The elegant lines and rehearsed perfection of the following sonata couldn't quite erase the haunting notes Lena had left behind. Meanwhile, backstage, the whispers were beginning. "She really played that whole thing on that piano? Did you see the way the director tried to cut her off? I think she wrote it herself. That wasn't anything classical I've heard. She made me cry, and I don't cry." Lena sat alone near a row of unused timpani drums, still trying to absorb what had happened. Her mind was running, but her body had gone still. Like the music had left her, and all that remained was an echo. Then she saw him. Her father. He had managed to get in through the back after finishing a late job at the shop. He stood at the side exit door now, still in his oil-stained jacket, holding his cap in both hands like it was Sunday church. His eyes found hers. They were full. And then, without a word, he raised his calloused hands and began to clap. Slow, gentle, proud. She looked down at the ground because the tears came too fast to stop. That piano, that girl, that moment. It had never been about proving herself to the elites. It had always been for him, for her mother, for the music that had gotten her through every lonely night. "Miss Moreau." A voice broke the silence. She turned. It was an older woman in a long blue dress, wearing a name badge and an air of quiet command. Lena recognized her vaguely, one of the donors who had funded the conservatory's rebuilding campaign. "I just wanted to say," the woman said gently, "that was the most honest performance I've seen in 20 years. "Thank you," Lena said, still swallowing back emotion. The woman nodded. "I hope the conservatory has the wisdom to nurture you properly." Then she turned and walked away, but not before glancing back toward the curtain where Mr. Hawthorne was now being questioned by a few agitated guests. One man was raising his voice. "What do you mean she can't have another slot? That girl moved people. Who decided the order of the program? I'd rather see her play again than sit through another perfect but soulless concerto." The director's calm veneer was starting to fracture. Inside, the concert continued, but Lena could feel the energy shift. Like the fabric of the evening had been pulled tight and was now starting to tear. She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow morning, a clip of her performance, shakily filmed by an audience member, would be uploaded online. By afternoon, it would have over 500,000 views. By evening, it would pass 1,000,000. And the world beyond this hall, the world that had never heard of Lena Moreau, would begin to whisper her name. But for now, she sat with her father in the corner of the backstage hallway. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped one arm around her. The piano sat a few feet away, chipped and quiet, like a soldier resting after a long war. "I told you," he said softly, voice low and gravelly. "Didn't I tell you your music would speak?" She nodded, and then, faintly from the auditorium, another chant began. "Let her play! Let her play!" Voices rising, defiant. Lena sat up straight. Something was happening, and the night was far from over. The sound began in the back. Low at first, a single ripple in the still air. "Let her play." Then again, stronger. "Let her play." It rolled forward like thunder gathering across the plains, voices layering, building, merging into one rising call. 100 people, then 200, then nearly the entire lower mezzanine, the kind of sound that could knock down walls if left unanswered. Lena stood frozen, just outside the curtain, the raw echo of her performance still pulsing in her chest. Beside her, her father's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in wonder. He looked out at the crowd, at the rising movement his daughter had unknowingly ignited. And then came Mr. Hawthorne. He stormed toward them from stage left, his tuxedo jacket flaring behind him like a black flag of retreat. "This is completely inappropriate," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "This is a curated program, not a circus." He stopped short in front of Lena. "You'll go back out there and take a bow. That's it. We will not give in to theatrics." Lena's eyes locked on his, and for the first time she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Not after the sound of hundreds of strangers calling her name. She tilted her head slightly. "It's not theatrics, sir. It's music, and you heard it whether you admit it or not." Hawthorne's nostrils flared, his control faltering. "You got your applause, Miss Moreau. You got your moment. Now stop before you ruin it." But it was already too late. The curtain rustled open without warning. A boy, maybe 15, from the youth orchestra stood on stage with a mic in hand. He looked as nervous as he was determined. "I know I'm not supposed to speak," he said quickly, glancing toward the wings. "But I have to say something." The crowd hushed again, sensing something unscripted, unsanctioned. "That girl, the one with the upright piano?" He paused. "She made me feel something I've never felt playing music before. And if we're not here to feel, why are we even doing this?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. A few people clapped, then more. He turned and gestured backstage. "Lena, please, one more." Spotlights shifted. All eyes turned. Lena didn't move right away. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked to her father, who gave a slow nod, his hand squeezing her shoulder. This wasn't about rebellion. This was about truth. She stepped forward. As her feet hit the wood, the lights found her. The audience erupted in applause again. Not polite, not forced. It was the kind that lifted people to their feet without asking permission. Lena walked to her piano, the old upright still sitting center stage like a relic that had survived a storm. She sat down slowly, hands trembling, her mind racing. What should she play? Could she follow what she had already given? Then she remembered a lullaby. It was simple, unfinished, one her mother had hummed but never written down. Lena had always meant to complete it, to fill in the missing measures, to give it form. Tonight she would. She placed her hands on the keys, and she began. It started soft, like a breath in winter. The melody rolled gently at first, then bloomed, wider, richer, full of warmth. Each note stretched with longing, yet wrapped in hope. The kind of song you'd play to a child who didn't know the world could break their heart. The kind of song a mother might hum with her cheek pressed to your hair. The hall went utterly still. It wasn't showy, it wasn't grand, but it was real, and in its simplicity was something sacred. In the third measure, Lena let a minor chord slip in. A soft ache, then another, a memory of absence tucked between the sweetness. She played the way grief lives beside joy, always close, always silent, always part of the story, and then something extraordinary happened. From behind her, the string section began to play. It was tentative at first. A cello hummed low, a violin answered. No one had rehearsed this, but somehow they followed her, intuitively picking up her cues. One by one, the orchestra joined in. Not all, but enough. Enough to lift the lullaby into a slow, breathtaking swell. The pianist had become the conductor. and the music, like a river breaking its banks, flowed through the hall with grace and sorrow and something close to redemption. By the time Lena touched the final key, the entire theater was on its feet. Some were crying. Others were silent, hands clasped in front of them like they were in church. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a moment. Lena stood slowly. She bowed, not low, not dramatic, just enough to show her heart was full, and the audience didn't let her go. Backstage, chaos had erupted. Hawthorne paced, red-faced, barking into a headset. Who let her back out there? Who gave the mic to that kid? His words stumbled over themselves, no longer refined but rattled, desperate. A staff member approached him cautiously. "Sir, the donors, they're asking to speak with her." "What donors?" "Several," she said carefully, "including Mrs. Fields and Mr. Langston. They said your behavior tonight was—" She hesitated, then swallowed. "Concerning." Hawthorne's face paled. "They're considering a formal letter to the board." He said nothing, and for the first time it was clear even to him, the hall he had ruled with elegance and fear no longer bowed to his baton. Meanwhile, Lena had returned to the corridor, breathless, dazed, awash in praise. Students and strangers alike passed her with soft words and stunned expressions. Some just shook her hand. Others embraced her without warning. Emily found her again. "You changed something tonight," she whispered, her voice cracking. "For all of us." Lena didn't quite understand what she had done, not yet, but she felt the shift like a tide moving beneath her feet. Later, when she and her father finally stepped outside into the crisp night air, the parking lot was still half full. People lingered in clusters, still talking, still moved. Stars glittered overhead, and Lena tilted her face to the sky, letting the cold kiss her cheeks. "You okay, baby?" her father asked softly. She nodded, the quiet finally settling in. "I don't think I'll ever forget that song," he said. "Me neither," she whispered. They stood in silence for a while, the kind that only comes when everything inside you is finally blessedly still. Tomorrow would bring interviews, inquiries, emails from agencies and conservatories. Her world would change. But tonight she had played. And in doing so, she had torn down walls with nothing but bare hands and a broken piano. The next morning, the hall was empty. The velvet seats, still bathed in soft gold from the overhead chandeliers, sat in perfect silence, a sharp contrast to the chaos and thunder of the night before. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, slicing light across the stage where one piano remained. Not the Steinway, not the concert grand that had always held center like a throne. The upright was still there, still battered, still creaking, but now sacred. In a quiet corner office upstairs, Mr. Hawthorne poured a scalding cup of black coffee with the kind of stillness that only comes when everything is framed beneath the surface. His hands, normally so poised, trembled slightly as he reached for the lid. He had barely slept. The board had already begun circulating whispers about what had happened, about what he hadn't been able to control. Control. The word echoed in his mind like a broken note. For nearly 2 decades, he had shaped this conservatory into his private temple, a place where discipline ruled, where artistry bowed to structure, where emotions were allowed, but only within well-dressed boundaries. And yet one girl, one child with a cracked piano, had undone all of it in the space of 15 minutes. He checked his inbox. 12 new emails, 4 from board members, 2 from major donors, 1 from the press. But it was the final name that made him sit up straighter. Caroline Whitmore, of all people. She had been a student of his, years ago. Brilliant, defiant, always unwilling to conform. He remembered her as a girl with wild eyes and fingers that bled because she practiced too long. She'd left the conservatory under tense terms, and now she was a renowned composer. Respected. Feared even. Her email was short. Saw the footage. The girl's a miracle. You tried to box lightning. It burned through. Don't make the same mistake twice. He stared at the screen, the words burning into him. Then came the knock. It was soft, but sure. He already knew who it was. Lena stepped inside the room quietly, dressed simply in a slate blue sweater and black jeans. Her hair was tied back, her face unreadable. She held a folded envelope in her hands. "Miss Moreau," he began, smoothing his tie, standing. "What a surprise." "I didn't come to talk," she said, laying the envelope on his desk. "I came to return something." He frowned. "What is it?" "My scholarship letter," she said. "The partial offer." He opened it, brows pulling together. "I'm not sure I want to be part of a program that only sees talent when a crowd demands it," she said, her voice trembling, but not from fear. From truth. "I never needed a spotlight, I just wanted a chance." "And now the world is giving you more than that," he said, recovering quickly. "You've had your viral moment. I'm sure there are agents calling. Record labels even. But don't mistake fame for structure. Institutions matter." Lena looked at him for a long moment and then gave the faintest smile. Institutions matter, but people matter more. He watched her turn and leave. He didn't stop. Outside, the parking lot was bathed in soft morning light. Lena exhaled as she walked down the steps, each one a little lighter than the last. Her father waited by the truck, leaning against the door, sipping gas station coffee. "How'd it go?" he asked. She shrugged, smiling faintly. "I told the truth. That's all I had." He opened the passenger door for her. That's always been enough. They drove in silence for a while, the wind sliding through the open windows, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. It wasn't awkward, it was peaceful, like a held breath finally let go. Halfway through town, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Lena?" The voice on the other end was calm, feminine. "Familiar. This is Caroline Whitmore. I saw your performance last night." Lena blinked, heart skipping. "You? Did? You reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago. Why I started, why music meant anything at all." A pause. "I'd like to meet you." Lena didn't speak at first, then, softly, "Okay." That afternoon they met in an old cafe on the riverfront. No press, no cameras. Just two artists, one older, one younger, trading stories like old souls. Caroline listened more than she spoke, and when Lena finally played something on the cafe's dusty upright in the corner, the composer closed her eyes and whispered, "There it is." Before she left, Caroline placed a small business card in Lena's hand. On the back, handwritten, "Come study with me. No auditions, just honesty." By that evening, news had spread. The video of Lena's performance had passed 3.1 million views. Headlines read, "Teen Stuns Elite Concert Hall with Battered Piano and Brilliance." Director tried to cut her off. Now he's facing backlash. The girl who brought music back to life. Hawthorne stayed late that night, alone in his office. He didn't touch the piano in the corner. He didn't answer the phone. He just stared out the window, watching the snow begin to fall. Quiet, relentless, and wondered when he'd stopped hearing the music. Snow whispered across the city like a song no one asked for, soft, unrelenting, and almost too quiet to notice unless you were paying attention. It dusted rooftops and softened traffic sounds, muffling a world that, just a night ago, had echoed with thunderous applause and unrest. Inside the conservatory's grand rehearsal hall, the silence was deafening. Rows of empty music stands stretched in clean lines beneath the vaulted ceiling. The chandelier overhead gleamed as if unaware that the hearts below it were beginning to drift, to fracture. The room had been cleared for a special rehearsal, Hawthorne's command. Attendance was mandatory. Smiles were not. He stood at the front, baton in hand, eyes scanning the students as they filed in, some in crisp black attire, others in jeans and winter coats. No one spoke above a whisper. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone had heard the song. Everyone had felt something that still clung to their chests like snow that wouldn't melt. When the final student entered, the doors were closed, and Hawthorne cleared his throat. "I want to begin by thanking each of you for your professionalism during last night's performance," he began, his tone measured, his posture military. "It was, by many accounts, a memorable evening. But moving forward, we must re-establish the discipline and structure that define our institution." There was a pause. He let it settle like a gavel. "I understand that emotions were high, but music is not an act of rebellion. It is precision, excellence, and excellence requires control." In the back row, Emily Daniels shifted in her seat. Her eyes didn't blink. A few others fidgeted, uncomfortable. A violinist glanced toward the door as if wishing the rehearsal were already over. "And so," Hawthorne continued, "we will not be discussing Lena Moreau any further. Her situation is under review, but she is no longer part of this ensemble." A silence spread, not the silence of obedience, but the silence of stunned resistance. It was Emily who stood first. She didn't say a word, just lifted her violin from her lap and walked toward the door, heels echoing like footsteps in a chapel. Then a cellist followed. Then two clarinetists. Then, one by one, the students rose, not with anger, not with protest, but with quiet defiance. They didn't shout, they didn't throw insults, they just left, taking their music with them. By the end of it, fewer than 10 students remained in their seats. And Hawthorne stood there, eyes narrowed, hand gripping the baton as if it could still conduct something other than silence. Outside the rehearsal hall, the snow was falling harder. Students gathered in clusters, breath-forming clouds as they spoke in hushed tones. "I'm done pretending this place doesn't pick favorites. Did you see how he tried to erase her? She reminded me why I started playing." It was the beginning of something big, something irreversible. Meanwhile, across town, Lena sat cross-legged in her bedroom, surrounded by open envelopes. They were everywhere, on the bed, the floor, stacked in piles. Letters from schools, scholarships, invitations, interviews. A chaos of opportunity she couldn't have imagined 48 hours ago. She held one letter close, Caroline's, while her eyes skimmed another from a conservatory in Chicago. But her mind wasn't in the papers, it was still in the music. Still back on that stage, the warmth of the spotlight on her skin, the way the strings had joined her unannounced, the way the crowd had roared, not for perfection, but for truth. A knock came. Her father stepped in, holding 2 mugs of cocoa and a quiet smile. "You've got the whole world in here," he said, looking around. She smiled. "Feels like the whole world is asking me the same thing." "What's that?" "What I'm going to do next." He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Well, I've always thought the next step isn't about what the world wants. It's about what feels like home." Lena nodded. Her eyes fell on her piano in the corner, still dented, still faithful. She walked to it without thinking and sat down. She didn't open the lid. She didn't need to. Just resting her fingers on the wood was enough. "I don't want to forget this feeling," she said softly. Her father looked at her. "You won't." That night, she composed. She didn't call it composing, really. She just played, scribbled notes, hummed melodies, let her fingers chase ghosts across the keys. The song that came wasn't for an audience. It wasn't for a viral video. It was for her. And maybe, just maybe, for the others like her. The ones no one believed in until they had no choice. The next day, she returned to the conservatory, not because she had to, but because Emily had asked her to come. She found her in one of the small side rooms where students practiced chamber pieces. A few others were gathered there too, kids Lena barely knew, yet somehow trusted. They looked up when she entered, and someone handed her a sheet of music. It was her song, transcribed, arranged, real. "We want to play it," Emily said, "not for a grade, not for a showcase, just for us." Lena's throat tightened. She sat down beside them, opened her folder, and the room filled with quiet tuning, soft smiles, and something that felt almost like beginning again. In the corner, the old upright had been wheeled in, a gift from the janitor, who had secretly moved it in when no one was watching. Lena took her place, and once again, without permission, without announcement, they played. Music filled the room. Not the kind that wins awards, the kind that heals. The snow kept falling, soft and steady like time folding over itself. Inside that modest, windowed rehearsal room at the edge of campus, the old upright piano breathed music into the walls again. Not grand, not polished, but honest. A melody hummed into life beneath the worn fingertips of students who had, for so long, been trained to mute their instincts for the sake of precision. Lena sat at the piano's heart, her back straight, her eyes half closed. Around her, violins soared in quiet harmony. A cello wept behind her. And somewhere near the corner, a clarinetist played a note that broke in the middle. Cracked, imperfect, beautiful. They weren't rehearsing, they were remembering. None of them said it out loud, but they all knew something sacred had taken root, and no room, no ranking, no audition could define it. When the last note fell into silence, it stayed there, gently suspended, as if even the air itself needed time to recover. Emily looked up from her score. "What do we call it?" Lena smiled softly, then glanced out the window where the snow coated everything in a hush of white. "The first storm," she said, because that's what it felt like that night, everything breaking open. Emily nodded. "It fits." Across campus, in the high-ceilinged administrative wing, Mr. Hawthorne stood by the tall glass window of his office, watching that same storm blur the horizon. His desk was empty. The music sheets that usually blanketed it in careful academic chaos were gone. What remained was a thin stack of typed letters, each signed with careful hands, each echoing the same unsettling message. I no longer feel confident in the conservatory's current leadership. They came from donors, alumni, even one from a fellow faculty member he once mentored. The phrasing differed, but the spirit was the same. Quiet doubt, growing disapproval, whispers rising in volume. But what haunted him most wasn't the letters. It was the silence that followed Lena's second performance. It hadn't been a grand show. There had been no introduction, no invitation, just the girl and her battered piano. And yet, the room had breathed differently afterward. He'd seen it on their faces. He hadn't just lost the audience, he had lost the room. A knock came at the door. Polite, measured. "Come in," he said, his voice frayed at the edges. The dean stepped inside. A small woman with steel gray hair and a voice that never rose, yet always commanded attention. "Elliot, Dean Hartford." He gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "There's been a vote," she said without preamble. He stiffened. "Among whom?" "Faculty, advisory board, even a few students were consulted." His mouth went dry. "About?" She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time he saw not disapproval, but sadness. "About the future of this program," she said, "and whether your vision still fits it." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words never came. They hovered on his tongue, then dissolved, because deep down he already knew. "It was never about the piano," she said, softer now. "It was about the walls we built so high we couldn't hear what was happening on the other side." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. She laid a paper on his desk, just one this time. It wasn't a termination letter. Not yet. But it was close. "We're asking you to take a leave," she said. "Reflect, reconnect, decide whether you're still here to teach or to rule." And then she left. The silence she left behind felt colder than the snow outside. That evening, Lena walked alone through the city's winter streets, her coat wrapped tight, scarf tucked beneath her chin, fingers raw from playing too long. But she didn't mind the cold. She welcomed it. It reminded her she was alive. At a small bookstore downtown, she stopped beneath the awning and peered in. There, on a modest display table, sat a new biography of Caroline Whitmore. The subtitle read, "The Composer Who Refused to Obey." Lena smiled faintly and stepped inside. The clerk recognized her instantly. "You're the girl from the video, aren't you?" he said, awed. "The one who played on that old upright?" She blushed. "I guess so." He nodded. "You made my grandmother cry, and she hates crying." They both laughed. Before she left, he handed her a small notebook. "Blank pages," he said, "for whatever comes next." She took it with both hands. Outside, the snow had started to ease, the sky revealing faint stars behind the curtain of gray. She stopped at the bench outside the shop, opened the notebook, and wrote, "January 15th. Tonight I remembered that a single note, when played with truth, can carry more than an entire orchestra trained in fear." The pages stayed warm in her hands, her breath curling in the air. Back on campus, the old upright had been moved again, this time not by a janitor but by students. They placed it in the center of the open atrium near the entrance, a space usually reserved for announcements and alumni portraits. They surrounded it with candles, with photos of past performances, with handwritten messages on folded note cards. "You reminded me why I started playing. Music should never feel like a cage. We see you, Lena." It became something of a shrine, a gathering place, a spark, and slowly, carefully, the conservatory began to change. More students shared original compositions, more practice rooms played unfamiliar melodies. Teachers who had stayed quiet began asking different questions, about feeling, not just technique. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The first storm had come, and from it, something new was beginning to bloom. Lena sat on the rooftop of the small apartment building where her father had lived for nearly 2 decades. The city stretched beyond her feet. Quiet, powdered in fresh snow, rooftops glistening like piano keys under moonlight. In the distance, a church bell rang once, sharp and sudden, like a metronome breaking a silence she hadn't noticed until then. She pulled her coat tighter, notebook balanced on her knees, the pages already heavy with inked thoughts. For the first time in her life, she felt full, of music, of questions, of possibilities she hadn't dared to let herself imagine. And yet, beneath the surface of it all, something had begun to gnaw at her. Not fear. Not exactly. More like the whisper of a question. Was I enough? Or was I just a moment? In the past week, Lena's life had become a blur of phone calls, emails, interviews. Some were genuine, people who wanted to understand her story, her music. But others were greedy, shallow, interested in packaging her pain, her defiance, her piano like a novelty for the world to chew and forget. "You're the girl with the broken piano," someone had shouted across the street just that morning, like she was a character in a fairy tale. She wasn't offended, but she wasn't a fable either. Just a girl. A girl who loved the weight of keys beneath her fingers and the quiet ache of a melody blooming from nowhere. The door creaked behind her. Her father stepped onto the roof, hands tucked into the deep pockets of his flannel coat, a thermos of tea in one hand. "You okay up here?" he asked gently, passing the thermos to her. She nodded. "Just thinking." He sat beside her with a small grunt, the kind dads make when their joints resist winter. "What about?" he asked. "Whether all of this is real," she said, glancing out at the glittering horizon. "Whether I deserved it, or if people just got caught up in something they didn't expect." He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his coat and pulled something out. A photograph, slightly faded, folded at the corners. It was her, 5 years old, sitting on a milk crate in the garage, hands covered in grease, hair wild with curls, looking up at the piano she hadn't yet touched with anything more than curiosity. "You know what I see when I look at this?" he said. She shook her head. "I see someone who didn't need a stage to be heard. Someone who already knew how to listen. To the world, to herself. That's all music is, baby. It's listening, and having the guts to answer." Lena looked down at the photo. Tears burned the back of her throat. "You didn't change," he said. "The world just started paying attention." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the cold forgotten. The next morning, Lena returned to the conservatory, not because she had to. Not because anyone expected her, but because something unfinished still lingered there. Inside the atrium, the piano was still surrounded by candles and letters. But now there was something else. A circle of students had gathered. Not in protest, not in defiance, in purpose. They were playing again. Not as an orchestra, not as soloists, but as people. One girl tapped a quiet beat on a hand drum. Another played guitar. A flutist improvised a harmony that didn't exist in any textbook. Lena slipped in unnoticed, heart swelling with something that felt dangerously close to peace. Emily spotted her first. Her face lit up with a smile that held no performance, no approval, just warmth. "We missed you," she said simply. Lena nodded. She sat at the piano. No announcement, no attention. Just the soft lifting of a wooden lid, the familiar creak of the bench beneath her. And she played. Not the piece from the concert, not the lullaby, something new. A melody shaped by rooftops and thermoses, by unanswered questions, by a father's voice and a photo folded with time. And the room, no, the entire building, held its breath. Afterward, someone asked if she would teach, not as a professor, not in a classroom. Just show them how to listen like she did. Lena laughed at first. "I don't know how to teach that." But a voice from behind her, one of the violinists, smiled and said, "You already are." That night, she sat at her desk and opened Caroline Whitmore's latest letter. In it, Caroline wrote, "Great composers don't write to be remembered. They write because if they don't, the silence will never let them sleep. Keep writing." Beneath it was a ticket, a flight to New York, an invitation to study with her, fully funded, no audition. Lena stared at it for a long time. It felt too big, too distant, too far from the dusty keys and cracked varnish of the only piano she'd ever truly trusted. But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. She turned to her father later that evening as he folded laundry in the living room. "Would you be okay," she asked, "if I left for a while?" He didn't even pause. "I'd be proud," he said, folding one of her old sweatshirts and handing it to her. "Home's not a place you stay in. It's the thing you carry when you go." The next morning, Lena stood on the porch of the conservatory one last time. She placed her fingers on the piano that had come to symbolize everything she'd once believed she wasn't allowed to be. And she whispered, not to the crowd, not to the snow, but to the wood itself, "Thank you for never asking me to be perfect." Then she pressed a final note, a single, quiet goodbye. The plane trembled as it broke through the clouds, slicing into a sky so blue it felt like it had never known sorrow. Lena sat by the window, her forehead lightly pressed to the glass, watching the quilt of her old world shrink beneath her. The snow was gone now, left behind like a final stanza, and the city below pulsed with life and noise and dreams she hadn't dared to imagine. Her battered notebook lay closed in her lap, its cover soft from weeks of use, corners curled like petals left too long in sunlight. Her fingers itched to open it, to write something, anything. But for the first time since the night she had played in the concert hall, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't the wild card anymore. She wasn't the girl with the broken piano, or the voice that shook the walls of tradition. She was just Lena, unmoored, unwritten. The flight attendant passed, asking softly if she needed anything. Lena smiled faintly. No, thank you. She didn't need anything, she just needed time. When the plane touched down at JFK, the city greeted her like it knew her name and didn't care. Yellow cabs hissed along slick streets. Steam rose from the pavement. Strangers brushed past her with practiced urgency, each one part of a rhythm she hadn't learned yet. She carried only a single suitcase and her notebook. Her piano, of course, hadn't come. It had been left behind like a secret. Her new home was a modest walk-up apartment near the Upper West Side, courtesy of Caroline's foundation. The keys were left in a lockbox with a handwritten note on the kitchen table. Create, don't apologize, don't perform, just create, CW. There was a digital keyboard set against one wall, not fancy, not old, not hers, but it would do. Lena unpacked in silence, placing her notebook on the windowsill, where light poured in like honey. She hung a photo of her father beside the bed. Beneath it, the smallest scrap of a handwritten melody, her mother's lullaby, now complete. That night, she didn't sleep. The city breathed differently. She opened her window and let the cold creep in, the hum of distant sirens folding into her pulse. Somewhere, a jazz club throbbed with trumpet and laughter. Somewhere else, a street performer drummed on buckets with hands calloused by winter. She sat at the keyboard, pressed one note. It sounded wrong, too clean, too new. Her fingers paused, trembling. Her body remembered how to play, but her soul hesitated, as though afraid the magic she had once found might not travel with her. Still, she tried. Each note landed with caution, without weight. It was like speaking in a language you hadn't used in years. She stopped midway through the melody, frustrated, then closed her eyes and listened. The room didn't answer, but something within her stirred. The next morning, she walked the halls of the Whitmore School of Music for the first time. It was nothing like the conservatory back home. Here, the walls bore paintings of unnamed musicians, not donors. The practice rooms were scattered with scribbled notes on the floor, laughter echoing through cracked doors. Students played barefoot, in sweats, some with closed eyes, others with open hearts. It was chaos. It was freedom. Caroline Whitmore met her in the smallest, most unadorned studio in the building. A single grand piano stood in the corner, the walls covered in corkboard with faded compositions pinned up like fingerprints. "Welcome to the strange and the sacred," Caroline said, motioning for Lena to sit. "You ready to make a mess?" Lena blinked. "I thought I came here to get better." Caroline smiled, sitting across from her. "You came here to find your voice. Getting better is what people say when they want you to sound more like them." Lena's throat tightened. She said nothing. Caroline studied her face. "You played truth," she said quietly. "But truth isn't a performance. It's a risk, and risks get quieter when the world starts clapping too loud." That afternoon, they played nothing. They talked about fear, about the need to be seen, and the greater need to vanish into sound. About her mother. About her father's hands. How they'd fixed something no one else would have tried to save. Caroline didn't ask to hear her play. She didn't need to. "You've got storms in you," she said as Lena stood to leave. "Let's make room for them." Days passed in a strange rhythm, mornings of journaling, afternoons of listening to music Lena couldn't name, from countries she'd never studied, African polyrhythms, Armenian lullabies, Icelandic piano trios built from ice and breath and wind. She walked the city at night, letting it press its heartbeat into her ribs. She watched children dance to saxophones in Central Park. She saw an old woman playing Chopin on a bench near the Met, her hands shaking but her face lit with something sacred. Everywhere she saw what music could be. Not polish, not perfection, presence. Then one morning her phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Thought you'd want to know. Hawthorne resigned." Lena stared at the screen. He hadn't been fired. He had walked away. The article below the message was simple, devoid of drama. He had cited personal reflection, thanked the conservatory, and said he was taking time to reconnect with the root of why I chose to teach. Lena didn't feel victorious. She felt quiet, like a door had been closed without a slam. That same evening, her old upright arrived. She hadn't requested it. It had been shipped anonymously, with one note taped to its side. Some voices shouldn't be left behind. Play like the world never told you to stop. E.D. Emily. Lena wept. That night, she lifted the lid and placed her fingers on the same worn keys. The creak was still there. The chipped F still caught slightly under pressure. It was home. She played. Not for an audience, not for a cause, just for the silence. And for the girl who still lived in her. The one who played in a garage with a cracked pedal and a hope too big for her hands. The invitation came wrapped in gold-rimmed paper, tucked beneath her apartment door like something sacred or cursed, she wasn't sure which. New York Philharmonic Winter Gala. Featured guest, Lena Moreau. Lena stood with the envelope in hand, her breath slow, chest hollowed with disbelief. The name printed beneath her sent a ripple through her spine. Guest conductor Caroline Whitmore. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't stepped on a major stage since that night. And yet, her name was there, inked in black like a promise the world had already signed. The next day, she found Caroline in the same studio where they always met, the walls unchanged, cluttered with honesty. Lena held the invitation out like something burning. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," Caroline said, not looking up from her notebook. "But the truth is, your story's outgrown you." Lena sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath her. "I don't want to become someone else," she whispered. Caroline finally looked up. "Then don't. But remember, it's not about who watches. It's about whether the music still belongs to you when they do." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The city lights bled through her curtains, painting ghost shapes across the ceiling. She lay in bed, clutching her old notebook to her chest, the pages filled with half-finished melodies, questions, words she hadn't yet spoken aloud. Could she go back? Could she stand under 1,000 chandeliers and play something that wasn't for applause? Or would they twist her again, into the girl with the broken piano, the viral underdog, the quiet revolution dressed in teenage humility? She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to be heard. A week later, the night of the gala arrived. The concert hall pulsed with grandeur. Marble floors reflected soft chandeliers. Waiters floated past with trays of champagne. The city's most powerful voices had gathered, not to be changed, but to be impressed. Backstage, Lena sat beside her upright. Yes, her upright. They had offered her a Steinway, even insisted. She declined. If she was going to play, she would do it with the piano that had taught her to be brave in silence. The same one that remembered her mother's lullaby. The same one her father had rebuilt with bare hands and a full heart. Dressed in deep navy, no frills, no sparkle, Lena waited quietly. The murmur of the crowd beyond the curtains swelled like a tide pressing against a fragile shore. Emily had flown in from the conservatory. She stood nearby, adjusting a violin strap, her eyes glassy with emotion. "You look like you've been doing this your whole life," she said. Lena laughed once, gently. "I haven't." "But your music has," Emily replied. When it was her turn to walk out, Lena took a breath so deep it felt like a baptism. The curtain rose, not with drama, but grace. She stepped onto the stage, her shoes quiet against the hardwood floor. The lights above made halos out of dust. The piano sat at the center, humble and worn like a friend waiting patiently. The crowd hushed. Lena didn't speak. She sat. Her fingers hovered, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought of everything. The garage, the scraped knuckles, the whisper of her mother's voice on bad nights, the way her father stood in the shadows that night at the conservatory, clapping when no one else had the courage to be first. She closed her eyes and began. The piece was nameless. It didn't come from a famous composer. It wasn't in the program. It was stitched together from memory, fragments of her childhood, a piece of the lullaby, a touch of the chaos she had carried since New York opened its doors and dared her to walk through. The audience didn't move, not one sound. It was a song of becoming, of growing up in the cracks between applause. The middle of the piece unraveled into a minor key, aching and full of restraint. Then softly, it turned. like a child taking its first step across a frozen lake. And when it ended, she did not bow. She just looked out at them, all of them, and said softly into the mic, "I was once told music wasn't rebellion, but I've learned it can be recovery, if you let it be honest." Then she stood, and the room did not clap right away. They stood, first one, then another, then all of them. Not because she was extraordinary, but because, somehow, she had made them feel like maybe they were too. Backstage, Caroline waited with folded arms and a look that wasn't pride, but peace. "You didn't just play the room," she said. "You reminded them what it means to listen." Lena sat down on the bench again slowly. Her hands were shaking, but her soul had never been steadier. The snow had returned. Weeks after the gala, soft flurries drifted across the city like forgotten music notes searching for a home. They dusted the sidewalks, blurred the taxi lights, and covered the rooftop of Lena's apartment with a quiet that reminded her of home. Not the house, not the garage. Something deeper. She stood by the window, a mug of tea in hand, wearing her father's old hoodie that still smelled faintly of oil and warmth. Her upright piano sat in its usual spot, chipped, unchanged. She hadn't touched it in 2 days. Not because she was done playing, but because she was finally full. The performance at the gala had stirred more than standing ovations. It had reopened doors she never thought she'd walk through. Invitations poured in from conservatories in Europe, film composers, nonprofit foundations offering grants to fund her compositions. But the one that lingered most was the quietest. A letter from a music teacher in Kansas. Typed on wrinkled paper, it read, "I showed your performance to my students. One of my boys, he barely speaks, cried. Today, he sat at our school's broken piano for the first time. Thank you for reminding him that silence isn't the end of the song." Lena read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her notebook. That afternoon, she walked across the city and into a community center tucked between 2 shuttered restaurants. It didn't look like much from the outside. Inside, the paint was chipped, the chairs mismatched, and the piano, worse than hers, sat hunched in the corner, keys missing, one leg propped up by a stack of books. A small group of kids sat in a semicircle, laughter bouncing off the walls like sunlight off windows. She smiled. "Do you know who that is?" one of the girls whispered wide-eyed. "She's the broken piano girl." Lena knelt beside them. "Not broken," she said gently, "just different." That afternoon they didn't do scales. They didn't memorize Bach, they wrote songs. Messy, imperfect songs. One about a dog named Tuna, another about a tree that missed its leaves. One about how loud loneliness can be. And when the kids left, parents towing them home by mittened hands, Lena stayed. She sat at the warped piano and ran her fingers over the missing keys. She didn't fix them. She just played around them. In her second spring in New York, she released her first album. It wasn't grand. It was self-produced, recorded on her upright in a friend's living room. The album was titled Splinters. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a memory. It climbed to the top of classical charts not because it was flawless, but because people said it felt like sitting beside someone telling you the truth in a language you forgot you knew. Back home, the conservatory changed, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. Mr. Hawthorne never returned. His resignation had been final, his departure silent, but not bitter. In a rare letter to the school newsletter, he wrote, "Perhaps I once confused control with care. I forgot that music must first move the soul before it ever wins the mind. May the next generation learn how to feel before they're told how to impress." Lena read the letter at night in her apartment with a candle burning beside her and tears she couldn't quite explain. She sent him no reply. She didn't need to. By fall, she was asked to speak at a global symposium for musical education. Hundreds of scholars, musicians, and educators gathered in an auditorium made of glass and light. When it was her turn, she stepped to the podium in worn boots and a long gray sweater, her curls tucked beneath a knit hat her father had sent her from home. She cleared her throat and said, "I once played a piano no one believed in, but it believed in me. And now I try to make music the way that piano made me feel, whole, even when I was missing pieces." The room was silent. Then came the applause. Not explosive, not chaotic, just steady, warm, like footsteps across familiar wood. Years later, when her story had become legend and her music taught in places she had never set foot, Lena returned home for one weekend. She and her father sat on the porch. She handed him a gift wrapped in plain brown paper. He opened it slowly. Inside was a record, her newest. On the cover, a photograph of her childhood garage. The shadows caught just right so that the piano inside looked like it was glowing. Her father traced the image with one rough finger. "She still plays?" he asked. Lena smiled. "Every time I do." That night, when the stars came out, Lena sat at her childhood piano once more. The garage smelled the same. Old pine, grease, the ghosts of laughter and afternoons long gone. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and played. Not for the crowd, not for the critics, not even for herself, but for the silence that had once wrapped around her so tightly she thought she'd never break free, and for the song that finally taught her how to breathe. Sometimes, the world will measure you by the gloss of your instrument, the weight of your silence, or the names stitched into your background. But true power, the kind that shifts hearts and silences crowds, doesn't come from pedigree. It comes from truth. From daring to sit at a broken piano and play as if every key holds a piece of your soul. Lena didn't just perform. She reminded us what music is meant to be. A voice for those who've been overlooked, a bridge between scars and healing, a rebellion wrapped in beauty. She showed us that you don't need permission to be heard. You only need the courage to speak with your whole heart. And sometimes the very thing they mock, the creaky bench, the chipped key, the silence before the storm, becomes the anthem the world never knew it needed. So if you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever been told you're not enough, let this story remind you. You are not the mistake in the melody. You are the reason the music matters. Keep playing, even if your voice shakes, especially then.